I think it's now time. Is it the Minutemen next,
It's
right?
Minutemen time.
So it's your show, Josh.
Yes, the Minutemen, double nickels on the dime. In the opening montage, you heard Corona, a song you might recognize. And then in the opening montage, two of my favorite things, Jesus and Tequila.
My boss kicked me out, and I can't deny it. My life, Jesus and tequila, I'm satisfied, and I can't deny it.
All right.
I often think of you on brand that way. Yeah. Mhm.
All right. Double Nickels on the Dime, released in 1984. I mean,
You want some numbers, Josh?
Yeah, please.
So Double Nickels on the Dime comes in at number 44 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 7 in 1984, number 345 of all time. It is the Minutemen's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. This album also made Rolling Stone's list at number 267. And the Minutemen come in at number 341 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
Yep. Yeah, I think they consider, the Minutemen consider this their best album. Historically and legacy-wise, it's considered their best album. So
Can I ask a question early, Josh, before we get into it?
Yeah, go for it.
I was trying to think artists that have better song titles than this Minutemen album.
Oh, yeah, it's a good one.
So I came up with Morrissey solo career has pretty hilarious song titles, I think. And the Dead Kennedys, right, have some pretty funny song titles. But can you guys think of any that have more intriguing, funny song titles than... Because the Replacements, who we're going to cover later, also have pretty funny song titles.
I think Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention had some pretty funny song titles.
They had weird ones, but I don't remember them being funny. Maybe I'm just not remembering it correctly.
Well, that would have been a good essential question that we can just go cover
Funny,
sometime.
yeah.
Anyway.
Do you guys happen to know why it's called Double Nickels on the Dime, or what that is referring to?
I don't.
Okay, well,
I don't either.
wait and see. Let's see. I was just doing a little trivia there.
Little teaser there, Josh.
Yep. The Minutemen were formed in San Pedro, California in 1980 by guitarist Dennis Boone, aka D Boone, as he's always known, and bassist Mike Watt. George Hurley, the drummer, joined the band later that year in 1980, and these guys, just for context, were all in their early 20s when they formed the band. But Boone and Watt knew each other since they were 13 and had been in bands growing up. And all three of them were actually in a short-lived band before this called the Reactionaries, prior to forming the Minutemen. And their first live gig was opening for Black Flag, because they were in that SoCal, hardcore scene, punk rock scene that was going on at the time that we've touched on. They were influenced heavily by bands such as Wire, Gang of Four, the pop group, Richard Hell and the Voidoids, and the Urinals, and we covered many of those.
That's an
bands.
awesome name for a band, by the way, the Urinals. Especially for like a punk band. It's fantastic.
For sure. They were also fans of Captain Beefheart, as you probably heard. Even though they were part of the hardcore community and similar in a lot of ways with their speed and intensity and brevity of songs, they were also known for hybridizing punk rock and hardcore with other forms of music, as this exemplifies, I think. The name of the Minutemen was a play on a right-wing group from the 60s of the same name, and Mike Watt has also said it's a play on the word minute, as in a small amount, not in terms of the shortness of their songs, but just kind of a play on words there. Their first 7-inch EP, Paranoid Timers, was released by SST Records in July of 1980 and was sold at their shows and a few local record stores. Their first full album was called The Punchline and released in November of 1981. And then they really continued to alternate between releasing EPs and LPs, with EPs such as Joy, Bean Spill, and Buzz or Howl Under the Influence of Heat, and the LP What Makes a Man Start Fires. They also toured constantly, and even included a tour with Black Flag in Europe. But they were really touring all over the country. And I actually watched their documentary that came out in 2005 called We Jam Acano, the story of the Minutemen. And there's a lot of, what I really liked about that documentary is a lot of footage of them playing, and there's footage of them playing at the 930 Club, which I thought was really cool. That's in DC, where we were all at one point. For those listening, they were known in the California punk scene for a philosophy of jamming acano, which is short San Pedro slang for economical, and short a sense of thriftiness reflected in their touring and presentation. Like many punk rock and hardcore bands, they were very DIY and did a lot of the stuff in promoting themselves and advertising and stuff like that. And this leads us to their third full-length album, Double Nickels on the Dime, which came out July 3rd, 1984, also released by SST Records, and highlights their eclectic style by including elements of punk and country, jazz, spoken word, etc. I mean, there's 46 songs on this album, so you've got something for everyone. Almost every song is under 2 minutes and 30 seconds, I think I saw. Produced by Ethan Janes at Radio Tokyo Studio in Venice, California. The band originally had recorded just an album's worth of material in November of 1983. However, then they heard their label mates, Husker Du, were releasing a double album of Zen Arcade, so they decided to go back and write more material before releasing the album. In the liner notes of the album, Mike Watt wrote, "Take that, Huskers," as an acknowledgement for the idea of making a double album. And then, they decided on the concept of the record would be their cars, which is why there's car jams on the album, and then the cover as well. They wrote almost 24 more songs for the recording session in April 1984 to make it a double album. And they decided that each member would get a side of the album inspired by Pink Floyd's 1969 double album Umaguma, I think it is. And so that's where that comes from. And the fourth side of the album is called Side Chaff, which is an admission of leftover songs from their album. So Mike Watt refers to this album as their art record. Boone and Watt split songwriting pretty evenly, with Hurley also making contributions. They had contrasting musical styles between Boone and Watt. Watt would often write with more complex and abstract themes, and Boone would write more of the anthems and explored a lot of political issues, as you've heard on tracks like Vietnam and many of the other album tracks. The name of the album is a reaction to Sammy Hagar's I Can't Drive 55. Watt said that the big rebellion thing this is a quote, the big rebellion thing was writing your own fucking songs and trying to come up with your own story, your own picture, your own book, whatever. So we can't drive 55 because that was the national speed limit. Okay, we'll drive 55, but we'll make crazy music instead. So they didn't think that was very punk rock, just driving 55. And the speed limit, incidentally, was 55 at the time because Jimmy Carter was, the gas crisis was taking effect. So he lowered the speed limit nationally to conserve on gas, which I thought was interesting. The album cover depicts driving Mike Watt's Volkswagen Beetle exactly 55, driving southbound in downtown LA, where I-10 meets the San Pedro intersection of Route 11 and 110. And Watt had also said that the cover was inspired by Kraftwerk's 1974 album Autobahn, which has just a picture of a highway on it. And
are you just saying every band we've ever covered? Is that your goal in this bio, Josh?
Yeah. And then so Double Nickels on the Dime refers to trucker slang. So 55 going double nickels is 55 miles per hour, and then on the dime is going down the I-10. So that's where the album title comes from. The SST released the record At the same time as Zen Arcade, they actually delayed Zen Arcade's release so that both of the albums could come out and be released at the same time. So that's a lot of music on one day if you happen to pick up both those albums. They didn't release any singles, but a sampler EP was sent to radio stations titled Wheels of Fortune. They also actually made 2 videos, This Ain't No Picnic and Ain't Talking About Love, a cover of Van Halen's Ain't Talking About Love. This Ain't No Picnic was their first video and later nominated for an MTV award. And Ain't Talking About Love was really only 40 seconds, and it was a promo of a live performance of the band, basically just for promotional purposes. In 87, the album was remastered for a CD release, and to fit it on a CD, they omitted the car jams and 3 of the songs, which is why you can't hear, which is why no digital release has those 3 songs. You have to go to YouTube to hear those extra tracks. So really only the vinyl LP still has the full track listing. You can't get it on CD or whatever other format. And this album marks the point where many punk bands began to ignore the limitations of the hardcore scene. And as we've touched on, according to American Hardcore, a tribal history author, Stephen Blush, Double Nickels on the Dime was, along with Zen Arcade, either the pinnacle or downfall of the pure hardcore scene, and this remains their best-selling album. I have a little postscript, but I'm curious, have you guys heard the Minutemen before? What's your experience with them? I've kind of known them from historical and kind of legacy perspective, but I don't think I've ever listened to this album. So let's start with Matt. What did you think of Double Nickels on the Dime?
So yeah, I can't say that I knew them prior to this. Maybe a name only, and I think maybe there was one song that somebody put on a mix at some point. So my initial reaction was one of surprise. I thought that this was going to be way more of a traditional punk sounding record. I thought that this was just going to be a lot. I mean, I knew that there was a ton of tracks on it, very short, and I thought it was going to be more, I guess, edgier. I guess I was thinking more harder edged, not necessarily hardcore, but definitely like more of that traditional punk sound. And I was surprised to not really get that. You know, it's a fairly stripped down record. A lot of the songs on here kind of seem like demos, kind of seem like cutting room floor stuff that, you know, might have been some, you know, ideas that they were fleshing out for like a quote unquote true album of sorts. So it took me a little while to kind of get into the flow of what was happening with this record.
Same.
And I think it does get better with repeated listenings for sure. I really struggled in the early days of the week trying to make sense of what was happening, of trying to distinguish one song from the next. I generally speaking, I'm not a big fan of lots of short songs.
Yeah, it's hard to digest.
Yeah, and it's just when maybe you're starting to get the idea of the song, it moves on to something else, and then so it's like a very ADD type record in that regard. It reminded me of Wire, of the Pink Flag album that we covered.
Yeah.
That was just, you know, even though that was more easily digestible because it wasn't 46 songs, you know, that was just like, what the heck? So it was really kind of hard to make sense of what was going on early on. But the more I listened to it, the more I kind of saw how there was a lot to like in here. And it's interesting, Josh, you mentioned several bands, because there were definitely things that I was trying to keep track of, like, what does this sound like? Because there's a lot of stuff going on here. This is not just a one track kind of record, but definitely Gang of Four was something that kind of came up early. It was they have a similar kind of guitar sound. It's like a very tinny, there's not like a lot of distortion on it, you know, because it was very Gang of Four kind of thing. The Captain Beefheart / Frank Zappa influence is definitely peppered here in different songs. And then later artist, Chili Peppers. I mean, that was one of the first things that kind of came to mind, was kind of like that kind of funk guitar, like a stripped down punk, you know, kind of thing going on, that you know, more of like the Hillel Slovak / you know, John Frusciante guitar sound. Sonic Youth, even though I'm not totally into Sonic Youth, but there was some kind of more of that, more kind of later indie rock sounds and experimental stuff that Sonic Youth would do. And then they had also like a very classic rock, kind of blues rock kind of thing, like the Grateful. I thought Don't Look Now, that the one that sounds like it's a live track that's recorded in the back of a dingy bar or something like that. That totally that sounded like a Grateful Dead kind of goof song. And I don't know if that's what they were going for, but I've heard a couple of Grateful Dead live songs, and that voice, the what he's doing with his voice there very much sounds like one of the Grateful Dead singers. So in some ways, this album kind of is all over the place. It's one of those things. It's like the weather in New England, right? If you don't like it, wait five minutes, and then then the next wait for the next track, and you're going to get something different. You've even got something like, what is it, Cohesion? I think early on, it's just like a Spanish guitar, part. There's no lyrics to it. So it's a very interesting record, and I feel like I would want to listen to this more. I think I would like it. I think I'm gonna go thumbs up on it, but it does suffer a little bit for me in trying to just wrap my head around, what's going on, from jumping from one track to the next, and and really kind of getting lost in the record, not knowing exactly how long it's been playing. Like, oh, this has got to be like, I have to be halfway through this by now, and then you realize you're only like 12 songs into it, and you're like, wow, there's like, so in that sense, it's kind of it's weirdly dense at the same time, even though the songs themselves are kind of simplistic, but just the sheer scope of this really kind of expands it out. It makes it I don't know, it's hard to listen to in one shot, I think, and really kind of get full enjoyment as I would with other records. So very different, unique, but plenty of stuff here to hang my hat on. Like more traditional songs like Jesus and Tequila was a song that stood out that I really liked. Themselves, I liked that song. That was more of a short record. What was it? I'm trying to see, even now I'm trying to think of like, what was the song? Like maybe The Glory of Man. There was a couple of...
Save us some words, Matt. My God. Like,
don't worry, there's like 30 other
There's
songs.
plenty. Yeah. John, you're going to find the words. I have no doubt, okay? So I'm thumbs up on this, and it's just hard for me to kind of pinpoint which songs, because I didn't necessarily write all of them. Like, this is the song that stood out the most. But I'm going to go thumbs up on this.
Yeah, this was because I'm familiar, much like you said, Josh. I'm familiar with them as, I think you called it a legacy band, and that's a good term. I think I know of them as an artist that has been quoted or put in boxes that are similar to other artists that I know better. So I was actually very interested to listen to this album, because I don't know why, but it just never sort of crossed my paths along the way. And it kind of went through similar experience to Matt. The first time I listened to it, it was an overwhelming experience, not a negative one. It just was like, okay, what? All right, I know that now I'm going to have to listen to this different ways and re-listens. So the second time I listened to it in sort of segments, a little bit at a time, so I could feel like I got more of an idea of the individuality of each of the songs, because it blended together so much. And it's very interesting placement wise, because Zen Arcade is very similar, and obviously helped inspire the format a little bit of this. But it's a callback to, we've covered albums like this throughout our time on the show. I think of like The Who Sell Out was kind of like this. It's similar to kind of how like a rock opera is at times, where there's all of these points. So in some ways, this kind of functioned almost like a rock opera to me, where there's all this stuff, right? And it's like, how do I contextualize this? So whether it be, Quadrophenia, I know I used The Who Sell Out already, but Quadrophenia, would be something similar to that. And obviously the Mothers of Invention and that Freak Out album, right? Or We're in It for the Money, like that came to mind immediately. So I felt like it was in that lane, right, where there's a lot of like disjointed songs. Trout Mask Replica, right, another thing with just found songs. Yep. Even something like The Wall, where there's just all of these sort of loosely connected things. I guess here there isn't. I was waiting to see, Josh, if you said there was like an overriding theme of the songs, but it doesn't sound like that's the case. It's more just sort of a collection of ideas. Okay, so in that sense, it is different than a rock album, or rock opera, I should say. But I was impressed by the versatility of the band and keeping me on my toes a little bit. I almost think that this album should come with a disclaimer, like must be listened to several times, because
Yeah.
I can't imagine anyone picks this up cold and just is able to like swallow what's being presented here in one bite, because the songs, it's very hard to in first listen individually distinguish, even though they sound different. You just kind of, they just flow into the other parts, and some are fragments, and that's where it's like that Wire album, Pink Flag, that similarly kind of kept me on my toes a little bit with not quite knowing where it is, and songs felt unfinished on that Wire album. Now, I never got that feeling here. Most of these songs sort of felt like they got to a coda and then faded out, or at least had a finale, right? Whereas I felt like the Wire album just sort of just sometimes you'd leave where you felt like it was the middle of the song, right? And sometimes it would get to the end, and sometimes it would be abrupt. But I think I was impressed by the fact that it felt like a hardcore album, like throughout, even when the sound didn't go there. It almost felt like the energy stayed in like a hardcore type of energy, certainly like a almost like an anarchist type energy. Contrarian maybe is the word I would say. Lyrically, certainly that comes up. The song title choices certainly bring that up, but definitely like a proto trolling, would you say, is kind of a little bit of the vibe on this album. I would say it does make sense that they're from New England as well, right?
No,
they're from
Southern California.
Are they Southern California? Okay, they're from Southern California. Okay, gotcha. So, I mean, I guess in that sense, I don't think of Southern California being like that, but that's where, Dead Kennedys were from Northern California, right? And
I think so.
Yeah, and who have we covered from Southern California? The Descendants?
Black Flag and
Black Flag.
Descendants.
Okay, yeah. And so they don't neatly fit in exactly with them, but certainly they're cousins of both of them. Lyrical themes with the Descendants and energy with Black Flag. You could see them playing together. So, yeah, this was a thumbs up for me. And the more I listened to it, the more I liked it. And I think the more I listened to it even beyond this, and I think the best compliment I can give this album is I'm going to listen to this album again, because it intrigued me enough that I feel like there's still stones I have to uncover in this album. But as you said, Matt, it is hard to put your thumb exactly on what this album is, because it's a lot of things all at once. All of which, though, are intriguing, in my opinion. And that's a compliment to the group, because you'd think it would be overwhelming. And first listen it is, but it starts to become less overwhelming. Now, I would say I think it's best, of all the ways I listen to it, I think it's best listened to in little 4-song segments, so you can really appreciate it, and then you kind of can piece them together and almost make your own compilation album of the strongest tracks. That's another cool way to re-listen to this album. So
yeah, I really appreciated the band listening to this, and especially the more I listened to it, and then especially watching the doc too. I think I think the musicianship is really there first and foremost, as opposed to maybe other hardcore bands. The drumming is really solid on this, and Hurley's a really good drummer, I think, and Watt. I like how because there's only 3 of them, and there's no kind of tricks or anything, or extra stuff added in. It's very stripped down, but you can hear all 3 of their instruments pretty evenly and clearly. So I really picked up on Watt's bass line, and he plays, if you watch them, he plays the bass kind of frantically and with energy in this punk rock way, and I really like that. And there's a lot of great bass lines on that, and like you said, Matt, I also thought of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and there's a lot of funk bass on this throughout, and a lot of kind of jamming in certain songs as well.
There's even a little of the Sublime vibe at times.
Yeah, Sublime was definitely indebted to them and covered them, and I think
it makes sense. They have a
also
similar
Southern
energy.
California.
Yeah, exactly.
I think Watt appeared in one of their videos or something I read.
Okay, that really tracks the more I think about it, because there is. I just kind of got to that as we were listening, but I'm how did I not get to that earlier? Because more and more it's clear. Yeah.
And Flea and Thurston Moore both kind of are on the dock talking about this band as well, so they're clearly influenced by them. I kind of like the variety. It's very avant-garde in some ways, but there's also just kind of these cool guitar riffs, little guitar riffs, short guitar riffs. D Boon's guitar is tuned intentionally with like high treble and has that unique kind of twangy, like sharp sound to it to counter kind of Watt's bass, and so kind of the sound of all three of the instruments just kind of play really well together for some reason. And I kind of thought of this album as kind of like a book of poems, because the songs are so short. You could really listen to this album in any order. There's no kind of there's no real through line between any of the songs, but you kind of get the impression of the band in any order. It's kind of impressionistic that way.
Yeah, shit from an old notebook almost could be like the title of this album, even though it's a song title, right? Because it does have that vibe, Josh. That's a great call.
Yeah, Boone and Watt's kind of lyrics are very like little short poems, and they, because the songs are so short, they're almost like haikus. They kind of repeat the lines, and that's it. They're like in and out. So listening to the lyrics, you could easily read the lyrics and get what that is. I really like the variety too. They got the acoustic with History Lesson Part 2, and then Matt named some of the other songs that are kind of different. Do you want a new wave or do you want the truth? That reminded me of like a 60s psychedelic song. I picked up on the funky bass a lot. The Corona, which was the opening track, I didn't realize that's famously the opening for Jackass, and I didn't know that was
sounds right.
That the Minutemen song when they played it.
Yeah, I didn't know that was a Minutemen song either, and then it came on. I'm like, whoa, okay, that's weird. Because I never processed like where I knew it was a song, but I never processed like where did the Jackass theme come from. I'm like, okay, now I felt like Beavis, like I'll be damned. You know what I mean? Kind of,
And so they do, as short of this as the songs are, they also kind of go traditional song structures for a stretch as well, and with songs like Glory of Man, Corona, Big Foist, which is a guitar riff I really liked. But then there's so many songs I kind of lost track of the different guitar riffs I like, and from one song to another. So they're doing covers too. Dr. Wu's a Steely Dan cover, Ain't Talking About Love, which isn't on this album, but is a Van Halen cover. So they're still indebted to the bands they like and interesting things like that.
Can I read you my favorite lyrics?
Oh, sure.
Josh?
Yeah, go for it.
So my favorite lyrics are from one of my favorite song titles too, God Bows to Math, which is, in a tomb of Enoch in the Queen's chambers, she lives guarding that holy cubit, God-given accuracy, measuring untold prophecy, how she loved that sacred inch. So that's the entirety of the lyrics. It's pretty fantastic. But like you said, that's, I think, a good example of like sort of the viewpoint you're getting, and also, like you said, like little poems. Even it's not a haiku, but I hear what you're saying. It's like a little quick hitter poem that you sort of write on a notebook. Or a music, like Deep Thoughts by Jack Handy.
Exactly. Deep Thoughts over 46 songs. And I appreciated it more ultimately the more I listened to it, and I really liked the guitar and stuff. At first, when you first listen to it, you're like, this just feels like too stripped down and stuff. But then the more I listened to it, the more I liked what they were going for. As far as Postscript goes, they released another album in 85 called Project Mersh, and they tried to make it more commercial, and kind of that was their commercial attempt. Did not sell as well despite being more accessible. And then their fourth and final album was called Three-Way Tie for Last, which was released in December of 1985. And this was their last tour. They actually opened for REM and played their final show December 13th, 1985. in Charlotte, North Carolina. And then sadly, December 22nd, D. Boone died in a van accident at the age of 27, putting an end to the band. They disbanded after that. Watt fell into a deep depression, but was convinced to continue performing by Sonic Youth. And actually their side project, Sisson Youth, was conceived to get Watt making music again, and Watt contributed to their album, The Whitey Project. So I think Sonic Youth is famous for having a lot of side projects, right, John?
I was about to say that's a side project. That's not a full
Yeah.
Sonic. They don't really sound like Sonic Youth. I know that they keep getting evoked, but I don't hear a lot of overlap sonically with them, except for weird
there was
guitar
a couple.
tunings.
There were a couple, and that's why I don't know offhand which one. But there were a couple of times where it was like kind of more of a somber tone, and there was like more speaking. Like it was kind of like a speaking thing going on, reminded me a little bit of a Sonic Youth kind of thing.
Yep.
Okay.
Watt and Hurley both intended to quit music after Boone's death, but encouraged by Minutemen fan Ed Crawford, also known as Ed from Ohio. All three of them formed the band Firehose in 1986. Both Watt and Hurley have also done solo work in the time since. Hurley and Watt have remained friends since Firehose disbanded. And on rare occasions, they reunite to play Minutemen songs as a duet, but they refuse to call themselves the Minutemen, nor have a substitute guitarist, and instead arrange the songs to be played on drum and bass. They call themselves, they don't even call themselves a Minutemen reunion. They instead bill themselves under their real names, with ads stating they will be playing Minutemen songs as a duet. So they really, unlike a lot of bands that we've talked about, they kind of lived and died by the three of them, and didn't really reunite or kind of capitalize on that at all. And
well, Josh, I would want you guys to replace me if I were to die. So just so you know, I'll leave that in my orders. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you are interested in the band, We Jam a Kano, as I said, is on YouTube, so you can listen to that, watch that for free. It's an hour and a half. I have put it on the Combing the Stacks movie list over on Letterboxd. That is always growing. And if you ever need ideas or forget what we've talked about, or interested in bands that we've covered, and if they're on have made movies. So that's the Minutemen in a minute or two.
And we're not covering them again, I don't think.
Nope.
Well, they barely have any more albums. So yeah, I mean,
Yep,
four full-length albums and a handful of EPs.
Yeah.
So that's it for me. But thumbs up. Any final thoughts? I know I cut you guys off with the post-coda.
No, I enjoyed it. I'm glad I listened to it, because it's been floating around for so long. That's the cool thing about this shit. Like, there's albums that have been floating around that I always am surprised I haven't listened to, and now that list of albums that fall in that category for me is quickly basically dissipated into almost none of those are around anymore. So
yeah, I'll be interested. I'll have to look at the list for the 90s of bands that I don't know. So I'm sure there's some, but yeah, 80s is a lot of those bands like Husker Du and stuff like that. So what were you gonna say, Matt?
Glad I listened to it multiple. I was just gonna say, we'll give it a good, after the first couple times, it's like, wow, it's trying to. So you got to be a little patient with it.
Yeah,
definitely worth it.